Welcome to Around the Empire. This is a fully independent podcast. Lend your support at patreon.com/aroundtheempire, rockfin.com/aroundtheempire, paypal.me/aroundtheempirepod. Also, please like, share, and subscribe. I'm your host, Joanne Leon, and our guest today is Connor Freeman. We talk about the escalation ladder of hostilities with China and how it developed under the last 4 presidents, and how we seem to climb further up that ladder every day. In a long bonus episode, we talk about the fall of Saigon moment in Afghanistan playing out right now. Connor Freeman is a writer at the Libertarian Institute, primarily covering foreign policy. He's been featured at antiwar.com, Counterpunch, and the Ron Paul Institute for Peace and Prosperity. He's also a frequent guest on the Conflicts of Interest podcast. We recorded this on August 12th, 2021, with an update on August 14th. Connor Freeman's here. Hello, Connor. Welcome to the show. It's great to have you on. Thanks so much for coming on the show.
Thank you so much, Joanne. It's an honor.
So today we're going to talk about a couple of things. There's a lot going on right now. But first, we're going to talk about China and this ladder of escalation we seem to be climbing with China and our foreign policy, that it just keeps getting worse and worse. And Connor wrote an article, and I'll link it in the show notes. It's over at Libertarian Institute, and it's titled "Next on the Agenda: War with China." And it's a really good article. I recommend you go read it. It's well structured, it's sourced like crazy, and it really lays things out in a really good way, and that's what we're going to talk about today. And then we're also going to, in the bonus section, the bonus segment, we're going to talk about Afghanistan, because today is really kind of a game changer day, in that it's August 12th and a lot happened today. It's very clear that the risk of Kabul falling is imminent, and we're going to send in troops. There were a couple of Pentagon and State Department press conferences called, and it was really kind of a pivoting day for Afghanistan. Not that it was unexpected. It's just, some people are making some moves we're going to talk about in the bonus segment. But I guess to start, Connor, I like the way that you laid out, first you laid out like what was happening with the Obama administration, and then how did that transition in the Trump administration, and then, what's happening with the Biden administration in terms of our attitude toward, not just our policies toward, but, our attitude toward China. And, these are such radically different presidents, but the trajectory seems to be fairly consistent, right? Going in this direction toward the pivot toward Asia, which started with Obama. I'm not even quite sure what our policies were during the Bush years, because we were so focused on the Middle East. But if you would sort of just go through that part of it, is how these policies developed under these past 3 presidents.
Sure. So speaking of the Bush administration, if you, first of all, thank you very much for your introduction. I really appreciate it. And, but to get to that point about the transition, I think, the PNAC group, who had such sway over W's administration, they had their eyes on China for a while. So, there's a lot of what I've learned about this comes from people like Gareth Porter. Gareth has written quite a bit. He has a great piece about this guy named Randall Schreiber, who was under Trump, was Assistant Secretary of Defense for Asia and Pacific Security Affairs. And he engineered this massive arms sale to Taiwan, upgraded F-16s and Boeing SLAM standoff land attack missiles, AGM-84E. And they use the planes, and they can shoot these missiles in Nanking and hit sensitive deep inland civilian and military targets. And he called it the worst escalation against China in years. And this guy was linked to Richard Armitage, and they had a couple of projects they had worked on, one of which was Armitage International, which is Shriver is known as Taiwan's man in Washington, basically. And these are ardent anti-China hawks, pro-Taiwan hardliners. And they were in bed with military industrial complex firms. This is more you could see this more with his group, Shriver's group, which I believe was chaired initially by Armitage, called the Project 2049 Institute. And I think the 2049 there is a reference to the idea that, well, China's going to try and take over the world by 2049 on the 100th year anniversary of the revolution. And so they go, he was in bed with the Taiwan Defense Ministry and all these different like organizations. I think it was a group called Prospect Foundation, which is like a group of former Taiwanese Defense Ministry officials. And they were pouring money with the State Department and other military industrial complex firms into this group. And what I came to find out as you read the piece, Wolfowitz, after he left the World Bank, was leading a group called the U.S. Taiwan Business Council. And he was like, you read this report they wrote where they're agitating strongly for this arms sale because Bush 2 and Obama and Clinton wouldn't sell these F-16s to Taiwan because of the fear of the tension, how bad that would be for U.S.-China relations.
Right.
And so not since HW had they sold F-16s like this to Taiwan. So that got pushed through. So that's one of the first times I noticed that PNAC, because he also talks about how PNAC has a long-standing desire to see, and you can see this right through with people like Tom Cotton and even, it's a different faction, I suppose, of neocon, but even Max Boot is now agitating for, changing the policy from strategic ambiguity to strategic clarity. And so there is a neocon. They were talking about basically how we should just outright say, we'll go back to the old Cold War policy of we will, defend Taiwan if you make a move against Taiwan. And this was more or less, this policy was shifting toward the end of Obama. But so to circle back, PNAC was talking about how they, in Rebuilding America's Defenses, the notorious document where they go, we need a new Pearl Harbor. That's the line that's referenced a lot. In that same document, they have a quote where they say that they go, raising U.S. military strength in East Asia is the key to coping with the rise of China to great power status, reflecting the gradual shift in the focus of American strategic concerns toward East Asia. A majority of the U.S. fleet, including 2/3 of all carrier battle groups, should be concentrated in the Pacific. A new permanent forward base should be established in Southeast Asia. So Obama's Asia pivot is shifting 2/3 of all air and naval forces to the Asia Pacific, goading China. And as John Pilger says, encircling them like a noose with hundreds of bases, missiles, bombers, warships. And under Trump, this policy, the trade war with China, and then really when the pandemic hit, is when I started to notice all this, reading people like Dave DeCamp at antiwar.com, how they were just sending aircraft carrier groups and warplanes and spy planes and warships into the South China Sea, the East China Sea, the Yellow Sea. And this was all being documented by a Beijing-based think tank called the South China Sea Strategic Situation Probing Initiative the whole time. And yeah, it's gone off the rails essentially since then.
Yeah. Now, not to get too deep into that thing, but are most of them based in Japan?
The
ships that are.
Oh, yeah. Well,
they're moving like large numbers of ships. Does that mean they're growing the base in Japan? Or I guess now, do we have a naval base?
Well, I have to look more into that, but I know that we have. So there was recently a report that they have these ocean surveillance vessels in the South China Sea. They were under Biden so far. They've been out there 161 days out of the first, I think 181 days a year. Those are based in Japan. And they have like 10-day, sometimes more than 10-day deployments. And there's usually no break. And Japan is getting more and more involved. We've done a few drills over there with, I think, the U.S., maybe it's the I don't remember, it's US, Britain, and France, or the US, Britain, and Japan. But regardless, they have this thing called the Nagasaki Prefecture, where they have a rapid deployment amphibious force that focuses, really, the idea is because we may need to go to war with China over the Senkaku Islands in the East China Sea. And that's kind of near where this is kind of the raison d'etre for this base and this buildup as far as they're concerned with this rapid deployment force. And the U.S. Hunter Biden, Austin was saying this, and then Biden reaffirmed it, and it's been reaffirmed a few times that they say we are committed to defending Japan's claims to the Senkaku Islands, which also happen to be claimed by China and Taiwan as well. But we have the biggest U.S. overseas military presence in Japan. It's more than, I think, 55,000 troops.
Yeah. Yeah, I can remember they wanted to reestablish a naval port in Vietnam for a while there too, and there was a fight over that, and I don't know what the outcome was, but I think Vietnam was sort of like, I don't want to get in the middle of this.
They have a policy called the 3 No's, where it's like, we won't have any bases, foreign military bases, because the U.S. wanted to put missiles in Vietnam, and they told them no way. And Gareth Porter has a piece about that too, but they have a policy called the 3 No's, where it's like they won't ally with another country against some other country. They won't be a part of any sort of military alliance, and they don't have any foreign military bases. So that didn't work out. But they're sending Kamala Harris now over there to try and have some influence.
Maybe Kamala cut that deal, right?
Yeah. And they sent Lloyd Austin as well. They're touring Singapore and Vietnam. And the idea is they're pushing this sort of free and open Indo-Pacific rhetoric, which is, they're saying that China wants to disrupt trade in the South China Sea. And they have a lot of claims in the South China Sea. I mean, it's not all very pretty what they're doing over there. But the thing is, my concern is it's being used because the U.S. under Pompeo rejected all these claims in July in last year. And then this policy of sending warships doing the phone ops, which started under Obama at the agitation of people like Harry Harris at Indo-Pacific Command or at the time Pacific Command, and John McCain at the Senate Armed Services Committee, and also like just Pentagon apparatchiks like Ashton Carter. And they were pushing for this policy. It ramped up under Trump. And so what we're seeing is, for instance, the phone ops under Trump, this is sailing warships near Chinese claimed islands and other, archipelagos and things like that.
Or right of navigation or whatever under that.
Exactly. Claim, and they've done it. Trump did it like 9 times within the 12 nautical mile kind of zone that China claims around these different islands. And some things like the Paracel Islands, I think, was one of the early ones Biden sent a warship by. But Trump set a record. He did like 9 phone ops last year. And I believe Biden at this point is already up to 4. And with like the Taiwan Strait, Obama sent warships through the Taiwan Strait 12 times in 2016. Trump beat his record last year and did it 13 times. And Biden is on pace to beat Trump's record in his first year. He's in 6 months, he sailed warships, Navy destroyers through there 7 times, less than 6 months.
Yeah.
Or just over 6 months.
So there's a metric for this ladder that we can sort of feel happening, but there's a hard metric showing that it is an escalation ladder. So as different as they are, they all sort of kept roughly the same policy toward China, ramping up, climbing this escalation ladder.
Sounds like Obama somewhat resisted some of the pressure at first, in the interest of working with China on climate change, and North Korea were the 2 primary focuses that he had because Ashton Carter was trying to pressure him into declaring China outright as a strategic competitor, and kind of inaugurating the great power competition paradigm we're in now. But that didn't really happen until 2017, 2018, when Mattis's Pentagon put out that new national security strategy targeting Russia and China in this kind of 2-front new Cold War, where it was like, officially codified in policy. and but what's interesting is Obama is, this is Hillary Clinton and Obama and Biden. I mean, I think that's, if you look at, we were discussing before the show, the sort of continuity where it seems like policies that Hillary Clinton would have enacted were ultimately enacted by Trump. And Trump had an interest for multiple reasons, the influence of people like Steve Bannon and his kind of anti-China rhetoric that he had even on the campaign trail. This was, he already had his sights set on China, the trade war and these kinds of things. And during 2020 is when when I first really started taking notice of this. They used the distraction of the COVID-19 pandemic to ramp up the rhetoric to and also the military provocations to a level that hadn't been seen before. But the policy was already in place. Hillary Clinton in 2009 said that the South China Sea is a national security. I forget exactly the term that she used, but basically it's a national security interest of the American empire. And, and then Barack Obama inaugurates this policy, and it was all ready to go. Essentially, they had something like by 2016, 2017, they already had like 400 bases surrounding China.
There was always this tug of war. Like the people were like, well, if this pivot to Asia, it's going to cost us, the people who wanted the focus to remain on the Middle East. There was, that tug of war going back and forth, but that seems to be falling away now. But it's curious that they, during the pandemic, sort of quietly ramped things up, because if you remember early in the pandemic, was it the Theodore Roosevelt where they had the outbreak and they had the big
I remember
crisis?
that. Yeah, I'm not sure which ship it was exactly, but I remember that whole controversy. And our mutual friend Kyle Anslin was bringing up how with all these drills going on all over the place in goading China, where we've got it's hard to keep track. There's so many drills. We've got drills going on in Australia. India is headed to the South China Sea now with 4 warships to conduct exercises with regional countries. And also, I think the Quad has the Malabar drills, which they did the largest ones in more than a decade last year in the Bay of Bengal. Those are about to kick off. And there's this. Anyway, there's a whole bunch of them we could talk about. But what they could. There's such a. It's like a petri dish for all the different contractions of COVID. If that's really a concern, then it seems like this is for a lot of reasons. I mean, if Biden's focus is on the environment, even if that's just a political gimmick, it doesn't seem like this policy jives with that at all. With Trump, I suppose you could say that didn't matter as much to that administration, but it's one of Biden's talking points and something that his base should be holding him, to account for. But there's very few people who call out the fact that just anyway, the Pentagon is the biggest polluter we have. And there's these drills around the Black Sea and the South China Sea are under Biden. They seem to be not stopping, and there's more happening all the time.
Yeah. And
they're getting bigger and bigger and bigger with all these different countries. They are getting bigger.
I know I saw something where North Korea, I believe that, Kim Jong-un's sister, who sort of acts like a diplomat they said something about the exercises this year are bigger than they have been for a very long time. They had been sort of scaled down before that. And why? I don't understand why. Why did you ramp those up again too? I mean, that's not really the topic that we're talking about, but
I think Austin said some very provocative. They keep he said something about I forget exactly, and I don't want to paraphrase, but it's something basically about how we need to be ready for a war. And obviously that's the subtext of all these different drills always, but they're saying stuff like that a lot more now. For instance, so the Admiral Samuel Papero, commander of the U.S. Pacific Fleet, or let's see, I'll find the exact quote. Oh so he says large scale exercise 2021 provides our Navy and Marine Corps team the opportunity to plan, direct, and establish full spectrum naval operations. We must build naval readiness and advance the art and science of naval warfare to be ready to fight tonight. The stakes could not be higher. And these are the largest amphibious exercises in 40 years. It's in 17 time zones, 5 numbered fleets, and this is the U.S. Navy and the Marines targeting Russia and China with these drills at the same time. It's U.S. Naval Forces, Europe, Africa, the Sixth Fleet, and also the Pacific Fleet at the same time. They're literally hearkening back to even explicitly they say like this is more akin to what we used to do in the 80s. They're
and I mean
totally.
the Navy loves it because now they have a justification to spend all this money and say we need more ships. And I mean they're doing that crazy Gerald Ford sound charge or whatever, exploding things in the ocean to test.
Oh yeah,
to test
the ship killer missiles that China has, and they're trying to say we can withstand this. And they caused like a 2.3 or something. I don't want to get the number wrong, but I'm sure you saw this. Some sort of, it's like an earthquake level of a hit.
Yeah, I think I may have seen 3.9. But
wow.
Also, this is, how much does an aircraft carrier cost now? At least got to be at least, when they used to cost $1 billion a piece a while ago. So it's probably a multi-billion-dollar ship. And you're just taking it out in the ocean, and I know I'm getting off track here,
but yeah, they wanted to see if it could be destroyed. Yeah, I mean, they said that there were no casualties and they were like less damage than you'd think.
Exactly.
Yeah,
they said no serious casualties, so somebody did get hurt.
Somebody got hurt. Oh my god. Yeah, no, it's they're legitimately preparing for a war with China. Not that it's coming anytime soon. I'm not trying to be alarmist about it, but Biden has said that the paradigm for the 21st century is we're in extreme competition with China to win the 21st century. The whole Pentagon has shifted its focus to China. They're saying it's the pacing threat, the pacing challenge. We're spending more in the military than we ever have. The national security budget for next year is $750 billion. And you've got, neocons like Liz Cheney and others saying this is not nearly enough to counter China. You've got to be ramping it up. I think Rubio put out something like this too. It's got to be up more than that by like tens of billions of dollars. There's a guy named Carlos Del Toro who's he's been nominated to be Navy Secretary, and he was speaking to I think it was the Senate Armed Services Committee about basically his confirmation. And he's being questioned by like Josh Hawley. And he goes, is it imperative that we be able to defend Taiwan and like protect Taiwan from China in the event of like an attack? And he goes, absolutely. And he says he's going to focus his attention exclusively on China if confirmed. And he also said, to your point, because they point to China and they go, well, they've got 350 some ships. We only have like 290 something. And as Dave DeCamp points out, they use this because they want all this. They want a lot more money going into the Navy, of course. And they go, they'll compare it just like it's equal. Like, oh, look at that number's bigger than that number. But the truth is, our tonnage dwarfs the Chinese Navy. We have, I think it's like 22 aircraft carrier strike groups with, I think, half of them sailing around the world at any given time. And they have like 2 aircraft carriers. And I think it might even be one that really functions properly. And it's runs on diesel, if I'm not mistaken. So, we've got, it's just incredible that it's a wonderful public works project for the Navy and the Air Force, especially because under Trump by July, they were flying 3 to 5 planes up near China's coast and in the South China Sea per day. And by September, they were doing 60 a month, refueling them with planes from Guam, preparing for attacks on long distance targets in the South China Sea. And when I was writing the piece, I realized that in February under Biden, because I thought those numbers at the time, they were record breaking. And then under Biden in February, they had flown 75 planes in just that month in the South China Sea and near China's coast. So the numbers are, and the defense ministry spokesman Wei Qian, Chinese, the defense ministry spokesman came out and said, look, this is getting a lot worse. You called us out in your first address to Congress, President Biden did, where he goes, and I told Z, we're going to militarize the Indo-Pacific just like we do with NATO and Eastern Europe. And he goes, well, the presence was bad enough under Trump, but it's increased under Biden's administration already here in April by 40% for the planes in the waters surrounding China and 20% for warships.
So do you think we really would go to war with China?
I don't know. I think if you look at people like Tom Cotton, who are constantly agitating for this, we've got to draw red lines. We got to have strategic clarity with, as with respect to Taiwan, and basically say that outright we will defend them against any kind of encroachment from China. And he also said if they, basically we should do the same thing if they get into a fight with India after the last, what was going on, the skirmishes between India and China in the Western Himalayas in the middle of last year. The U.S. built a whole new sort of intelligence sharing pact with India, and also they're part of the Quad. And if you look at the Quad, people like Stoltenberg want to get much more involved with the Quad, and a lot of NATO countries are now getting more involved in this Asia pivot. And that's part of what I talk about here. But I didn't even really, there's more to it, because you got Germany sending a warship there now. They have a warship they're going to be sending to the South China Sea. It might actually, it might actually already be there, but the Indians are going in there. You got the British with the HMS Defender, or the HMS Queen Elizabeth, their new aircraft carrier, which has U.S. warplanes and a destroyer in its strike group. Also, the Defender is a part of that strike group as well, which is the ship that got into that, that it could have been a disaster off the coast of Crimea when the Russians had to drop bombs in their course to get them to back off. And we know now that they deliberately did that to stoke tensions and to see what would happen. The U.S. had a spy plane up there. Eurocom said that, and they go, well, we're always in the Black Sea. What are you going to do about it, basically? And so you look at the rhetoric. Cotton is basically saying we need to draw all these red lines. You got people like Steve Bannon saying we're going to be at war, who I think has some influence over this policy. He's got a very powerful think tank with Frank Gaffney called the Committee on the Present Danger China that was really ramping up a lot of this rhetoric and has been very influential in people who are who have a lot of prominence in terms of rhetoric. You can see a lot of crossover with the kind of things that Tucker talks about with respect to China. And you can see, with people in the independent media like Tim Pool, my concern is that there seems to be a parallel thing going on here where the politicians are ramping up tensions with China. The military is ramping up tensions with China because I think they realize on some level the American people have Medea Benjamin and Nicholas Davies called it today in a piece they had about Afghanistan. They call Afghan war syndrome, akin to like Vietnam War syndrome. I think we have that. I think we have war on terror syndrome. I think the American people are tired of this militarism and just what it's done to the economy. And just, I think for basic morality reasons, it's very popular to be anti-war now, even on the right and the left. But there is some sort of a thing going on akin to what was with the Russiagate narrative, to some extent, not specifically Russiagate, but just the overall anti-Russia media campaign. There's sort of a similar thing happening with China. And so we have the populace also becoming increasingly fearful and hawkish on with respect to China. And I think it's kind of greasing the skids, where it shouldn't be such a smooth transition into this great power competition, especially when people are concerned about, spending and the economy. Like, where nobody's talking about we're spending more than we ever have on the military. That should be everybody's focus. But it doesn't seem to be getting the attention. It's partially because consent has been manufactured at these different levels, I think, where people just don't, they just figure, hey, well, you got to do something about China, right? China's taken over the world.
Yeah. I mean, if you ask people if they like wanted to have an actual war with China, probably wouldn't get a lot of support for that. Like the same kind of thing was true with Russia. They wanted to sort of growl at each other, particularly older people who lived through the Cold War, because, you know, that never came to a head. But yeah, it was an interesting time. You know, the enemy was there and they would but nobody actually had to like deploy troops. And I sometimes think the military would really like to go back to those glory days where you can still get big budgets and you can still um, you know, talk tough, but you don't actually go to war. Maybe you have, you know, maybe you ramp up a threat and it gets in the media and all that, but no actual war. And so I guess the thing with China that I always say is we're too dependent on them for things that you can't just very quickly resource, you know, get new sources for. We're just so, our economies are so, and our trade is just so entangled that if that trade was immediately cut off, you throw this country into a tailspin. So I don't know, with all the things that have been going on in the last couple of years, I guess almost anything is possible, but that it just seems like almost not possible
Well,
to have a war with China. And I wonder, you know.
well, what's interesting is back to people like Cotton, he's been advocating that we decouple from China
Yeah.
pretty ardently. And also, you know, we see more about, you know, basically the reverting the rescinding the preferential trade status with Hong Kong and these sanctions on Xinjiang and these advisories against US companies doing business in these different parts of China. It's sort of like they're decoupling and they're selectively decoupling and kind of we're getting there. We're kind of getting close to there. If they really do that, I mean, that's what's interesting is like, if you do decouple, oh, that's the other thing, because Australia recently, they're talking about doing a new trade deal with India, and there's I forget who what his former he might have been a former head of state, but he basically this they were just, a lot of people are saying like the answer to our problems with China is India, and so that just speaks to, you know, and of course this is Australia and India, they're part of the Quad with Japan, the quadrilateral security dialogue. There seems to be, but like you know, this idea that there's different ways we can isolate China, which would be really dangerous, of course, because it makes war that much more inevitable. And I, you know, to the point about nuclear war, that doesn't seem to get mentioned all that much. In fact, it's only used as a way of increasing the military budget. Like if you look at, you know, they're hyping up, Blinken is hyping up the threat of, oh, I think the Chinese are expanding their arsenal. They might double it in 10 years, you hear from the Hawks. Well, the Chinese have like 300 something warheads. They're way closer to like Britain and France in terms of the numbers than US or Russia, with like, you know, nearly 6,000 on both sides. So they use this as a way of kind of justifying our buildup, our nuclear, you know, under Obama and then Trump and now Biden. There's this policy, probably ultimately a multi-trillion-dollar program, but I think it's somewhere between $1 trillion and $1.5 trillion now, to basically redo the whole nuclear triad and
modernize or whatever. Yeah.
Yeah. And so we also see things like, and this was Marshall Billingsley under Trump, but now it's continuing under the Biden administration, like a lot of things where they, you know, this idea after the summit with Putin, Biden and Putin, they're like, well, maybe we'll discuss arms control. That would be a good thing, wouldn't it? And then they have this discussion in Geneva, another follow-up. And then after that, they kick a bunch of diplomats out and start saying, we need Russian diplomats. And they go, we need China in these negotiations. Because that's what Billingsley used to say. And it was always a non-starter because because the Chinese don't want to get involved in this, because they're like, why don't you reduce your arsenal first, and then we'll discuss, because they're, of course, the disparity. And so the Russians said, well, if you're going to bring China, why don't you bring the UK? Why don't you bring England and France into these discussions? And so, yeah, I'm sure we'll discuss, they're sort of these policies, this concurrent kind of aggressiveness and this near brinksmanship. We're kind of playing with fire now with Russia and China at the same time, especially under Biden, because as I think everybody kind of has a gut feeling about it, it doesn't seem like there's any real, who's really driving the bus. It seems like he really is kind of you can't tell. Sometimes he seems like he's sleepwalking and he's not really there. And then other times you're like, is he really
the show?
I don't either. I have a very, very doubtful about it. And I think we're really seeing now what it looks like when the, whatever you want to call it, the deep state is in charge. Because you have hawks just kind of where, if Victoria Nuland wants to really stoke tensions with Russia, that can be done. But if Kurt Campbell wants to really take on China, and like he says, the era of engagement is over. This is, he's got the architect of the Asia pivot, Kurt Campbell, who founded CNES with Michelle Flournoy, the most powerful think tank in America. And arguably, I've written about, they have extraordinary influence over Biden's administration. So many different people, Victoria Nuland being one of them, a former CEO. But they're huge China hawks. And Kurt Campbell is now the director of Indo-Pacific Affairs on the National Security Council. And he says the era of engagement is over. For the first time, we're really shifting our military might, economic interests, and strategic focus to China. And and so it's all concurrent with these additional sanctions and this pressure building on Russia too. So it just seems like you said, he's not, even if Biden was, really conscious and in charge, he's a really bad hawk on Russia anyway.
He's never met a war that he didn't like. He pretends to be the peace hawk now, and I guess he changed his mind on a few things, but he's usually right out there in front, cheering on whatever war. He
used the Iraq War too to his advantage for sure. He and Blinken. His whole cabinet is full of hardcore hawks, Sullivan, Nuland, and it's just crazy. And I don't especially not having somebody in there, even like Trump, who I'm very cynical about, just to, have some influence to say, I don't want to do this, or maybe not do this as much because that would be bad for my bet. You've got a guy who's in a coma, basically.
Yeah, basically. And, the way they put together this coalition that is the government right now, it was the big anti-Trump coalition, and there were so many players that I just wonder what they had to promise what kind of deals they had to cut in order to get this coalition together. And it feels like the worst of the worst, just a dangerous thing. I heard somebody say that, I think it was Francis Boyle on a podcast, said that the Biden administration is full of Brzezinski acolytes. So when it comes to Asia, that's not a good sign. This is not a good sign. It's not. I'm not a fan at all of Brzezinski anyway, but particularly on Russia, he's you couldn't trust that person's judgment on that. Just deranged on that topic. On China, I'm not as clear on what his views were there, but that's what they said. I don't know how to categorize the people who are in Biden's administration. I suspect it's a little more diverse than that, but if the dominating philosophy is the Brzezinski one, then I don't know. I feel like we're kind of in trouble.
Yeah, for sure. It seems like, especially, I was surprised, because it's unthinkable to bring Georgia or Ukraine into NATO. But at the same time, that's been a long-standing, that Blinken and Biden have been advocating that for more than a decade. And, the McCain faction, which was very anti-Trump, was very hawkish on Russia as well. I know during the war with Georgia, Cheney was advocating to bomb the Russians under the Caucasus Mountains, going through the tunnels, and Bush, opposed that at the time, thankfully. But I think even McCain supported that or that idea, and so yeah. And then the thing was, they kind of have this. Biden and Trump were trying to out-hawk each other on China in this last campaign. And with Russia, too, it's like the thing we said about Georgia and Ukraine, but Trump is the one who brought them in as enhanced opportunities partners in NATO, and or at least under his administration. And we see these constant exercises in the Black Sea. So I think in 2020, they were in the Black Sea for like 82 days, NATO. And that was 19 down or so from the previous year in 2019. So like, we got to step this up. And so if you, like I said about the ocean surveillance vessels in the South China Sea, it seems like they haven't left the Black Sea. You've had Sea Breeze, and you've had just the exercises in Eastern Europe and on Russia's borders with like Crystal Arrow, Defender Europe 21 being the largest exercise since the Cold War. And then I talked about this amphibious exercise. So maybe, all these different exercises and drills, it's extremely dangerous. I don't know how many more states they can, really bring into NATO at this point on Russia's borders, but it seems like the way they're going is just drilling constantly. And then I talk about in the piece how they have launched sort of a new psychological Cold War, because actually, an advisor to Putin's defense minister, Sergei Shoigu, has said that, look, they're launching a psychological war against, he called it a mental war, a war for people's minds. And what he was getting at was the Americans are throwing out all these accusations against us, things that are patently either they're unproven allegations or they're just not true. Like, from Bountygate to SolarWinds, stealing Russiagate is a perfect example. And there's more, the Skripals and even Navalny, that still hasn't really been proven. And it's just like, but we've launched sanctions over it, and we further isolated Russia on the international scene, because of them violating the rules-based international order, just like China. And there seems to be this kind of, they're doing the same thing with China, where, Microsoft accuses them back in March, or some group that they say is in China. And then they now NATO and the US are saying, and they're saying it's, I believe the UK as well, they're saying it's, this is linked to Beijing. It's a Beijing linked hacking group that did this. And it's like the Microsoft email exchange server. And now NATO has said that, cyber war, which is something that Russia is constantly accused of without proof. And, the SolarWinds password was like SolarWinds123. It was on GitHub publicly for 4 years. Even the former CEO has admitted that. The cybersecurity expert named Vinuth Kumar, who spoke to Reuters about it, goes, anybody could have pulled this off. I told them that. And he said that was the password. And then this CEO and the former CEO came out and said, yeah, that's true. And some intern did it. And so with China, they're saying, NATO is saying, well, a cyber intrusion could be a way to trigger Article 5. And Biden recently said that a cyber attack could be the pretext for a real shooting war with a major power. And everyone knows who he's talking about.
Yeah, that's not the first time that NATO has brought that subject up. That definitely... first of all, NATO decided to start up its own cybersecurity unit. This is at least a few years ago, but there were a lot of discussions about this too, about whether you could invoke Article 5. Article 5 over a cyber attack. So it's interesting that it's coming up again.
Yeah, and it's and so Microsoft, I point out in the piece, is a huge donor to Center for New American Security. And like I said, this is the Mr. Asia Pivot founded think tank, and they're also funded by Taiwan's de facto embassy, the Japanese embassy to the United States, and Boeing and Northrop Grumman and Raytheon, Google, and it's interesting because they have like Eli Ratner. So Eli Ratner is the guy who is now a special advisor to Lloyd Austin. And a lot of when Lloyd Austin was being confirmed, a lot of the rhetoric from the Republicans was he's not going to be hawkish enough on China. They weren't concerned that he came off the board of Raytheon or that he, took, regardless of him gossiping about it backstage or whatever, he did ultimately take the side of Al Qaeda and switch sides in the war in Yemen after he already was working with the Houthis against Al Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula. I think in January of 2015, the Wall Street Journal had reported. They weren't concerned about all that. They were concerned that he wouldn't be bad enough on China. And so and it turns out he's just, passes with flying colors, but he's being advised by this guy named Eli Ratner, who's from CNAS, who I believe Eli Ratner is the one who wrote a piece where he says we need a combat credible posture in the Indo-Pacific to counter China. And there's a bunch of others. Avril Haines, director of national intelligence, says we need to prioritize countering China and with their counterintelligence. She's, from CNAS. Newland, like I said, former CEO. There's it's very interesting, and and Michelle Flournoy is one of the worst China hawks. It's her think tank, and Dan Cohen had a piece recently where I forget what the number was, but it's quite a large number. It's more than I included in my original piece about it back in February. But there's a lot of money going around to these think tanks too, from like the Hudson Institute, for instance, a very anti-China think tank. They get a lot of money from Taiwan, Japan, South Korea. And so there's definitely a lot of money coming in from foreign powers to hype up all this threat with China. So, but like I said, this part of this, like I said, the new psychological Cold War, they're really ramping things up. And even with Iran, you could see that today with this sort of Mercer Street thing that hasn't been really proven that Iran had anything to do with. But we have Blinken at the Security Council saying that we need to hold Iran accountable, and the Israelis making all these myriad threats to attack Iran, and the UK sending special forces into Yemen to kill people who haven't been proven to have done the attack. It's just, I know this is what we've seen before, but it seems like it's escalating, these accusations and then further escalations based on the unproven allegations.
Yeah. And a big racket. Like you mentioned, the Quad. The Quad is the new alliance in Asia. But I didn't know that NATO was getting involved in the...
Stoltenberg says the rise of China is the defining issue now for the transatlantic alliance, and what are you
talking about? Transatlantic?
Yeah.
It's on the other. What?
Yeah, well, it's NATO is just it is the epitome of self-licking ice cream cone. So it's they want to really move in there. So I think that's why we see Germany sending a warship in there, and the British now their HMS, the Queen Elizabeth. What's interesting too is Germany said they wanted to dock in Shanghai, and the Chinese said, let's discuss this. What is the nature of this warship? You're sending. Why are you sending a warship? Because they go, we want to show that we're interested in dialogue. It's like, so you send a warship? Like, okay, it's kind of gumboat diplomacy on its face, So, now we just saw reports the other day of our Coast Guard now making a more cooperation with Taiwan. Taiwan is having its biggest drill of the year.
Coast Guard.
The U.S.
Guard.
Coast Guard with is now, exactly. Whose coast? The Transatlantic Alliance is now on, in China's near the South China Sea, I guess. And so we'll see. It seems to be the direction that it's all moving. Like I said, with the Navy saying that they're going to make this, you've got a guy who's in contention to head the whole branch. He says it's going to be his exclusive focus. And the focus, is more on Taiwan, because it's a wonderful way to to get more assets, because if you're going to defend Taiwan from China in the event of a war, you keep saying it's kind. And also, a lot of China analysts are saying that the more we do this and the more we increase the military activity there, it's not exactly like it would be a really bad decision. And the Chinese would have to be put in a very bad position and have to feel really kind of pressured to actually do that, because it's to your point about the economy. I mean, Taiwan is one of I believe China is Taiwan's biggest trading partner. China is Europe's biggest trading partner in goods. China is our biggest trading partner. It doesn't make hardly any economic sense to do this, but it seems like there is. I don't know what it is. If it's the military industrial complex, if it's all these different, because it seems like I don't understand. I haven't seen anything like this in my life, to where we're sort of playing this game where it's like, yeah, there could be nuclear war, but there's a lot of money in this, so I hope on some level, maybe they're doing this just because it's a corporate welfare scheme, but it's a really precarious one to do. But I suppose we've been, provoking Russia, expanding NATO on their borders, especially since, really Bush and Clinton. And really Bush, I suppose, with, bringing 7 different countries into NATO in 2004 and trying to get Ukraine and Georgia in there. But the French and Germans hit the brakes on that. And, the war in Ukraine, it's just it doesn't, we're ultimately relying on these other countries who are supposed to be the worst people in the world maintaining their stability and cooler heads. But like I said, these China analysts are saying, I've seen a lot of quotes where they say, this makes the attack on Taiwan a lot more likely than it would be otherwise, because it would be a huge deal for China to do that. And, Gareth Porter writes about how they used to have a policy called the 1992 consensus, where unofficially they had sent delegations where they basically were like, it led to a lot of cross-strait cooperation and stability. Basically it was just, it was basically one country, two systems, kind of, sort of like what used to be the case with Hong Kong. And but there's been this separatist party who's taken power called the Democratic Progressive Party. And previously, the U.S. would keep them in line, and these more separatist types, with a policy called dual deterrence, where they would tell the Taiwanese, don't do these escalatory, the rhetoric and the, we're going to unilaterally change the status quo, or I forget his name exactly, but Gareth talks about in this piece about one of these former presidents he says in some interview in 1999, where he goes, state to state, us and China, Taiwan and China. And the Clinton administration dispatched this guy who's like the main Taiwan hand at Brookings now. But at the time, I believe he was the director of the American Institute in Taiwan, to go tell them, knock it off. But now that same guy switched in 2016, 2015, when Tsai Ing-wen, who's the current president, took power. She's from the Democratic Progressive Party, and they knew she was going to be this hawkish kind of, pro-separatist leader. And so, you would think they would have put in this dual deterrence, which they've used multiple times to kind of hem in the more aggressive Taiwanese factions, but they haven't under Obama. And Obama really did it and Bush, this leading Taiwan hand, basically at the advice of Obama officials, supported this lady, Tsai Ing-wen, and her vice president, I think Gareth said, is the leader of the most separatist faction in that party. And he may be running and may be president in 2024. So that could get much riskier as we go forward. But behind Obama's decision was pressure on him from the Pentagon, because frankly, they didn't think, partially without hyping that threat of a war from a Chinese invasion of Taiwan, or all these, they talk about there's going to be a war in the South China Sea if we don't, get in there and build up forces beyond what we already have, that they couldn't justify these exorbitant budgets that they had in mind, the Pentagon, and it's working. It's absolutely working, because nobody really opposes it. Not specifically saying cut off, because I haven't seen even in the anti-war movement, I think we need to focus more on calling out this new policy of great power competition, because it could very easily spiral into a situation like Daniel Davis talks about, where if there is a war, the Chinese can hit American cities with nukes and kill millions of people, and that would inevitably happen if we went to war over Taiwan. So, all these people are saying we need to change to strategic. It's like, I don't understand exactly what people think the advantage is here, or why should we all die for Taiwan? I don't want anybody to get, imperiled or attacked or anything like that, but we're talking about a situation that doesn't affect our national security. And so,
yeah,
but
the same thing happened with the whole ramping up Russia and, deploying NATO troops in Eastern Europe. But people would bring up like the whole NATO treaty, bringing these countries into NATO. Like, do you really think that Americans are going to support sending their troops, to Latvia to save Latvia? Nothing against Latvia, but really, it's the same kind of situation. If you sort of just sat people down at the reality of the situation, they'd be saying, well, why? But everybody's sort of in this, I don't know.
We're very focused on domestic politics, and even the anti-war factions seem to be, and it's not wrong at all, because we've killed millions of people in the Middle East, and we're still blockading Yemen, and we're still bombing Somalia, and we were bombing hospitals in Afghanistan still on the way out. So we need to oppose them. We're not leaving Syria. We still have 60% of the population is at the brink of starvation or malnutrition. The Caesar Act sanctions, Israel's bombing Syria left and right, and even now Lebanon again. And we've maximum pressure on Iran, and who knows where this whole incident is going to lead to, if maximum pressure will continue, or if somehow we get back into the Iran deal. But yeah, we need to get out of both, I guess, is what I'm saying. And it seems like there's it doesn't seem, I guess maybe the closest we got was when Trump started saying NATO is, why the hell are we putting so much money into NATO? But it was always framed, my issue with that was it seemed to be framed usually in this free riders sort of framework, where the issue was not Article 5 and how ludicrous it is and how much money is going into NATO. What the hell are we going to ultimately use NATO for? It's kind of like what I say about the Asia pivot. We're surrounding China with myriad missiles, submarines, warships, warplanes. And, what are we going to use all this stuff for? What are we ultimately going to end the, we have Atlantic Resolve in Estonia and all these drills and militarizing the border with Russia. What are we ultimately going to use it for? Is it just deterrence? Is it just corporate welfare? Because the more and more we stoke tensions, we have the president of Belarus has said repeatedly now in the last couple of months that he goes, we're getting closer and closer to World War III, and he's basically blaming it on the Americans. And I don't really, the specifics, maybe I'd have to go back and look at, but you could make that case pretty easily that it's the US and NATO, and it's the US and its allies that are really stoking tensions now and getting us closer and closer to a war with a great power. Yeah,
it would be very hard to defend against that, to argue against that. So let's talk about getting out of wars for a minute. Let's pivot over to Afghanistan.
Sure.
Play on words. I'm getting goofy. It's getting late. So yeah, the situation's not good in Afghanistan. And the reason why we're doing a bonus question on Afghanistan today is because it was such a sort of a groundbreaking day. It very much looks like we're evacuating the embassy. I don't even know. I didn't check in the past few hours whether the Taliban took another capital.
Yeah, a lot could have, the rate it's going, a lot could have changed just since we started talking.
Yeah. So basically, I just wanted to get your thoughts on Afghanistan and the fact that today the Biden administration to sort of tense press conferences. Now we're rushing troops into Afghanistan. So I just kind of want to hear your thoughts on that. And then the second part of the question is, I couldn't help but wondering a lot lately. Had Biden just held up the deal to withdraw on May 1st, like would it have descended into this kind of chaos? Would the Taliban have asserted itself quite so quickly? I don't think that it would have. Well, I'll let you talk about, but even in the short or medium term, do you think it would have made a difference or not?
The answer to the bonus question is in the extra bonus segment for patrons. You can get access to all bonus content by subscribing at Rockfin or Patreon, plus other perks like patron live streams, Zoom calls, and access to our Discord channel where we can talk among ourselves. So that's my pitch, and I hope that some of you will join us. And now I'll continue with the interview wrap-up.
All right. Yeah. Well, on that note, Connor, thanks so much. It was great talking with you. And,
likewise. Thank you very much.
And if you would, there we go. If you would, please tell everybody how to find your work, how to follow you on Twitter, and all that good stuff.
All my stuff is at the Libertarian Institute you can just type my name in there, and all my episodes with Kyle and Will and conflicts of interest, and my appearances on Pat's show, Liberty Weekly, and all my articles. You can get my author archive, just click my name, and I usually have something as often as possible in the featured articles there on the front page. And you can follow me at Freeman's Mind 96 on Twitter too.
Take care. See you later.
Have a good one, Joanne. Thank you. You too.
Thanks for listening. Special thanks to Connor Freeman. Follow Connor on Twitter at Freeman's Mind 96. Find his work at the Libertarian Institute, antiwar.com, the Ron Paul Institute, and other media outlets. This podcast, independent media. Listener support, really important. Rockfin.com/AroundTheEmpire, Patreon.com/AroundTheEmpire, PayPal.me/AroundTheEmpirePod. You can find it on any mobile podcast app. Find everything you need at AroundTheEmpire.com. Don't forget to like, share, subscribe. Also follow on Twitter at AroundTheEmpire, and we'll see you next time. Take good care, everybody. Hang in there.